Alright, let's do some game dev. We're going to be going over the basics of jumping and collision detection so that if we run into something, we don't stick to the walls. We can test if we're grounded so that we don't just jump infinitely into space. Alright, just as a reminder, we're going to be using layer masks to classify which objects we want to collide with. Remember from last episode, we talked about assigning all the objects we want to test for collision into this layer so that we're not looking through every single object around us. Only the ones that we really know actually have collision we should care about. Alright, so inside of Unity, let's open up our script again. To actually detect if we run into something, we're going to be using what's called a contact filter. Usually people will use raycasts, and I've seen shapecasting, but this is just my preferred method. To do this, we're going to need to add a couple new private variables. We're going to need private contact filter 2D. We're going to call this contact filter. And then let's add a new private raycast hit 2D. We want our contact filter to return an array of results. So we're going to call this hits equal to new raycast hit 2D. And let's give it a buffer of 10. Before we go around to testing if we're actually colliding with anything, we're going to need to create a bool test. So let's make a private bool collide, if I can type, test. This is going to take a vector2 direction because we want to know which way we're testing for collision. In here, let's create float distance. I'm gonna hard code this in. This is gonna be how far it takes our colliders and shifts them to test if we're actually gonna collide with anything. So let's say if our rigid body reference dot cast, and we're gonna go put in our direction and then our contact filter reference, our hits array, and the distance we actually want to cast. This is actually returning an array of int results. So if this is greater than 0, we know we actually hit one or more things, and we should now return true because we are colliding with something. Otherwise, we return false. So before we go to jumping, we're gonna need to check if we're actually standing on the ground. Later we can get into double jumping or triple jumping, but for now we're gonna say as long as the player is standing on the ground or standing on something, he can jump, otherwise, no. So let's create a public bool, and we're gonna call this is grounded. This is gonna represent if our player's on the ground or not. And then we're gonna say is grounded is equal to the collide test that we just wrote, and our direction will be vector2.down. So next up, before we assign our new velocity, let's say if input.getKey, I'm just going to say people can hold down space and jump whenever they do land on the ground. Our jump key is going to be a key code space, and then we're going to pass in are we also grounded. If we get key code space and we are grounded, new velocity.y is going to be equal to a jump force. And that should be it. Let's hop into Unity, click play, and see what happens. And of course it doesn't work. Just a little hint, if your jump force is 0, you're not actually going to jump anywhere, so don't be like me and set this to something besides 0. If we press space, we jump, spam space, we only jump when we hit the ground. Now, if I go, let's rename this to platform. Let's go ahead and duplicate this, and you'll notice if we jump and we keep holding down D, we're stuck to the wall. This is because as we hold down D, we're constantly applying velocity to the right. And since we're colliding with something, we're just stuck to it. So we need to write another collision test for each direction that we want to move in to test if we actually run into something, and then reset our velocity because we just hit a wall. It's going to be pretty easy. Let's just, before we assign our velocity, we should also now test if horizontal is equal to -1, and which means we're going left. So we're going to do collide test vector2.left. So this means if we're going left and our collide test just returned true for something to our left, we now ran into something. We know this. So let's set our new velocity dot x equal to 0. And then let's just copy and paste this for going right. So let's make that +1, vector2 dot right. That should be the same. All right, let's go back into Unity, click play. And now when we run into a wall and I'm still holding down D, our velocity stopped and we fall to the ground. We're no longer getting stuck on walls. Awesome. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next episode.